States attacked, and I know there's many ways you can fill in that blank, but listen to this. The President of the United States attacked the country that has the largest American military base in the Middle East. And of course, he did it in a tweet. The president tweeted, "During my recent trip to the Middle East, I stated that there can no longer be funding of radical ideology. Leaders pointed to Qatar. Look." Donald Trump also tweeted, "So good to see the Saudi Arabia visit with the king and 50 countries already paying off. They said they would take a hard line on funding extremism, and all reference was pointing to Qatar. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end of the horror of terrorism. Or perhaps not." The president's tweets came after 7 countries led by Saudi Arabia have cut diplomatic ties with Qatar, which is host to an American military base housing more than 10,000 troops. Qatar's ambassador responded to President Trump's tweets today, telling the Daily Beast, "We were surprised. No one approached us directly and said, 'Look, we have problems with this and this and this.' It's unfortunate to see these tweets." Here's what the president said to the leader of Qatar less than a month ago.
We are friends. We've been friends now for a long time. And our relationship is extremely good.
What a
Friends
liar.
for a long time.
Yeah.
But that's over today, I guess.
Yep.
Today, another U.S. ally questioned America's commitment as a global leader. Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland gave a speech to Parliament where she pledged a buildup of Canada's military, partly in response to concerns about President Trump's leadership.
Indeed, many of the voters in last year's presidential election cast their ballots, animated in part by a desire to shrug off the burden of world leadership. To say this is not controversial, it is simply a fact. The fact that our friend and ally has come to question the very worth of its mantle of global leadership puts into sharper focus the need for the rest of us to set our own clear and sovereign course.
Joining us next,
The
Ambassador Wendy
Canadians
Sherman,
won't
and
be
also
coming here
Graeme Wood,
next
who's
year.
just returned from Qatar. That's next.
God.
I don't think we should roll out the red carpet to the President of the USA in the circumstances where his policies go against everything we stand for.
That was the mayor of London last night explaining why President Trump's invitation from the Queen for a state visit to the United Kingdom should be revoked. Joining us now, Wendy Sherman, former U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. Ambassador Sherman is also senior counselor at the Albright Stonebridge Group. Also with us, Graeme Wood, contributing editor of The Atlantic and an expert on ISIS. He has just returned from Qatar today. Ambassador Sherman, I want to get your reaction, first of all, to the situation in Qatar and the president's tweets about it.
Well, I'll be very interested to hear what Graeme has to say, but it's a very serious situation. And what is so interesting here is that the president thought after one joint meeting on counterterrorism in the Gulf that he had made best buddies with everyone. The 7 countries that pulled out of diplomatic relations with Qatar did not give the U.S. a heads up, did not consult with the U.S., just told them immediately before their announcement. In addition, we've put Secretary Mattis, Secretary Tillerson in a very difficult place by the president's tweets. Both of them, after this initial rift, had said we all need to remain calm. Usually the diplomatic response, Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis both offered to help mediate and calm the waters here. There is not to say that there aren't serious financing issues throughout the Middle East. There are. It is not to say that Iran is not doing malicious things in the region. They are. But the fact is that we need the Gulf to hang together if we're going to deal with counterterrorism. And as you pointed out, we've got 11,000 troops and coalition forces. All of our air power, most of our air power that strikes in Syria and Iraq, except from Incirlik in Turkey, comes out of the air base in Qatar. So this is an important piece of America's national security, and we need to really transparently talk about what's going on here, not do policy by tweets. Quite frankly, If I was a Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State in this situation, I'd just throw up my hands. My credibility would be shot.
Graeme, in Qatar, do they recognize that this is a president drowning in scandal and who is ignorant of all of the dynamics that would be contained somewhere inside that tweet?
I think that if they were watching closely, they should have been concerned by the moves of the president towards Saudi Arabia, which for a long time has been at Qatar's throat, saying that Qatar has been a bad player in the region. So they should have perhaps seen something coming, but I don't think even they saw anything as destructive or traumatic as what we actually saw in the last 24, 48 hours.
And how the president thinks this is a beginning of a victory in the war on terrorism. How do you see it?
I don't see it that way at all. You know, the Islamic State is probably the thing that we're looking at most closely. And the Islamic State does not exist because governments like Qatar or Saudi Arabia or any other national government is financing them. There have been, of course, contributions of states, but mostly this is an example of a movement that has arisen without state support and instead sort of arising out of the land and out of the support of individuals from many different countries. So the idea that you would ask Qatar to dial back its support for a movement and see the end of terrorism is simply fantasy.
Ambassador Sherman, what would have happened in any other administration if these countries had taken this action against Qatar today?
Well, I think we would have seen what Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis are tried to do, which is to calm the waters, offer to mediate, call better angels to the table. You know, this is getting incredibly serious. I hope there is no conflict that breaks out. I hope that this settles down. Kuwait has offered to help. Other countries have offered to help. And it's very complicated, as I think you and Graeme both know. Egypt, for instance, although it's cut off diplomatic relations with Qatar, still has thousands of Egyptians, largely professionals, who work in Qatar and send a lot of money back to Egypt. So this is a very interdependent region in the world, and we need to understand that and hang together. There are going to be food security issues in Qatar almost immediately. Their stock market went down by 7.3%. And this isn't good for Saudi Arabia either, or the Emirates. Their airlines are going to be affected by the interconnections here in the Middle East. So I think we would have tried to calm the waters. American leadership is not about pitting one country against the other. It's about trying to work through diplomacy backed by a credible threat of force to reach objectives that are in our national security, and this is not the way to go about it.
Graeme, how does ISIS see this today?
Well, ISIS hasn't commented on this, but of course ISIS is thrilled to see its enemies, who are Muslim, who are Arab, fighting each other. They see Saudi Arabia and Qatar both as enemies. And of course, they believe that Saudi Arabia has its credibility diminished by its associations with Donald Trump. But any time that there is fighting amongst the coalition that's fighting ISIS, they say, look, this is an example of how we stick together. We're a monolithic Muslim group that unifies all Muslims, and they are bickering partisans. So the more the better of fighting from their perspective.
Ambassador Sherman, take a look around the world for us. We see the mayor of London saying the president's reaction to the terrorist attack there should absolutely disqualify him from a state visit. The invitation should be revoked. We see Canada saying we've got to step up. The United States just isn't the United States anymore. Countries around the world looking at President Trump and saying we do not have a reliable ally anymore.
Well, indeed, and of course we heard Angela Merkel saying after the meeting with the president in Brussels and at the G7 in Sicily that Europe was going to have to go its own way. Now we want everyone to step up in the world to whatever they can do to provide leadership. But the United States has always provided global leadership, and probably the most concerning piece I've seen recently was by General McMaster, the National Security Advisor, and Gary Cohn of the National Economic Council in the Wall Street Journal, saying that there is no global community. We're just a bunch of competing interests. That transactional approach to the world, as I've said and others have said, is playing checkers, not chess, and the world is about chess. We are interconnected. We learned that in the 2008 recession. If we didn't know it before, as our economy goes, so do others. As China's economy goes, so does ours. So we're in this together, and if you're going to fight terror, if you're going to deal with pandemics, if you're going to deal with trafficking, if you're going to deal with climate change, you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to find a way to do some of it together.
Graeme, does anyone in the Middle East think that the United States is now on a better footing for fighting ISIS?
Well, you might find perhaps the government of Egypt, the government of Saudi Arabia, suggesting that the United States has put its lot in with the winning teams. Now, I don't think, though, that anyone who's actively involved in the fight against ISIS would say that the United States is in a better position than it was a few months ago. Instead, they would say that the United States has simply boxed in the enemies of Bashar al-Assad and is more in a path toward accepting that Bashar al-Assad is going to be the eventual ruler of Syria. That's something that ISIS is delighted to find that the United States is spending its moral credibility and not focusing on defeating ISIS in its core territory.
Graeme Wood and Wendy Sherman, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, tonight's last word.
President Trump will not block former FBI Director James Comey from testifying before Congress. That's a good call, because if you block the testimony of the FBI Director you praised for investigating Hillary Clinton and then fired for investigating your ties to Russia and then lied about why you fired him and later admitted why you fired him, you might look guilty.
And Thursday, as we know, will be a very big day on Capitol Hill for the future of the Trump presidency. On Thursday night, the last word will be here with complete analysis of James Comey's testimony to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Among our guests Thursday night will be Harvard Law Professor Lawrence Tribe and former Watergate prosecutor Jill Banks. We'll ask them if they heard evidence of impeachable offenses in James Comey's testimony. We will have the political reaction to the day's events from Republicans, of a Republican perspective, with George Will and David Frum. George Will, of course, remembers well the Watergate investigation and the parallels that has for the Trump investigation. And where does the investigation go next? We'll ask Congressman Eric Swalwell of the House Intelligence Committee and Mika Oyang, a former staffer of the House Intelligence Committee. We will have that and much more this Thursday night here at The Last Word. Our live coverage continues now into the 11th hour with Brian.